Now, NXT this week, like all wrestling shows right now, was smashed by the NBA and the NHL playoffs. Ended up doing the lowest rating in the history of the show on USA Network. For a show that was built mostly around the ladies. This was the first time ever that every single match on this show involved the women. Not since WWE did the Evolution pay-per-view 4 years ago has there been an entire show filled with nothing but women's matches. Now, one of the matches was a mixed tag, but that still counts, and the focus was mostly on the women in that match anyway. It was mostly on Saray and Tiffany Stratton. But a lot of female representation on this show, and really it carried over from the end of Raw the night before, even though it was a 5-minute segment. Raw on Monday ended with a women's match. It ended with Bianca Belair and Asuka and Becky Lynch getting involved. And so from a women's main event on Monday, they went right into a show on Tuesday that had a woman, well, 2 of them at least, in every single match, which is something that's not been done before. One of the few segments that did not involve the women, but I wish it had, it would have been a lot more interesting, was Joe Gacy in the ring with his druid friends to talk about abducting Bron Breakker last week. Yes, the NXT champion was kidnapped last week and left for dead somewhere. He had a sack over his head. You know, when I watch NXT, I watch it with a sack over my head. I call it the sack of shame. Because if anybody were to walk into the room and watch me watching this show, I would be embarrassed. So that is how I watch NXT. I poke a few holes in the sack. I look like Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part 2. When he had that fucking potato sack over his head. Nobody seemed overly concerned about the fact that the NXT champion was left for dead somewhere. The show just went on like it was a perfectly normal occurrence. Which, for NXT, I guess it is. People get abducted on this show all the time. This angle is WCW level bad. Like the filthy animals burying Ric Flair out in the desert bad. Funny thing about that angle, now that I mention it, that was a Russo special, in case that one wasn't so obvious. That was a Russo special. He was on Ric Flair's podcast years ago, the first one, I think. I mean, Flair's had so many of them by now, it's hard to keep track. I mean, his podcasts are like his wives. But Russo claimed that it was done. That whole angle with him being buried in the desert, he claimed it was done as a way to get Flair off television for a few months. His idea was he was going to take all the legends, the Hogans and the Flairs and Sting and people like that. He was going to take all the legends one by one, pick them off and take them off television, and then eventually reunite them like the Avengers. So on that podcast, I wish I still had the audio. Flair turns around and says, 2 weeks after you buried me in the desert, you called me to come back to TV because Terry Funk quit the company. So much for keeping Flair off TV for this great long-term angle. I wish WWE would bury this storyline in the desert. Gacy was out there, he blathered on about something while the fans tried to drown him out because they know this entire thing sucks. So they shouted, they tried to shut him up, and he just went on. You know, the other problem with this is it's dragging Bron Breakker down as well. This does no good whatsoever for Bron Breakker. Him being part of this bullshit, I mean, this is the sort of thing that he should be kept as far away from as possible. But think about it. In a way, it kind of works. NXT is to prepare you for the main roster. Well, this is the kind of shit that you're going to get on the main roster. So Bron Breakker is just being conditioned for the shit that awaits him once he gets called up. So in a way, they are preparing him for the future. But I still say that he should be kept far away from this kind of crap. So from one kidnapping, we go to another. There is a war between Legado del Fantasma and Tony D'Angelo's crew. Last week, Legado kidnapped D'Angelo's consigliere, AJ Galante, threw him in a car, drove off. This week, they returned the favor and kidnapped Cruz del Toro from the NXT parking lot, which I have dubbed the Bermuda Triangle of wrestling because people are constantly disappearing from there. I mean, it is beyond parody at this point. If you park your car there, you're basically just asking for it. It's too bad Tammy Sitch never parked her car in the NXT parking lot. So later on, Santos Escobar, he calls D'Angelo on his cell. I guess he had his number for some reason. He calls him on his cell phone. and we got a cinematic split-screen conversation between both men about their mutual abductions. And D'Angelo agreed to release Del Toro if Escobar released Galante. And they agreed to settle the issue with a match. That's one way to set up a wrestling match, I suppose. Escobar said, "Hey, Tony, fuck you," which was bleeped, and he hung up on him, and D'Angelo flipped, and he flipped the table over out of anger. First, they kidnapped Raul Mendoza's name. Now they kidnapped Raul Mendoza. It's been a very tough year for the guy. Solo Sikoa was out for a promo to make it very clear that he wanted the next shot at the North American title after Cameron Grimes defends his championship against Carmelo Hayes at NXT In Your House next month. June 4th is the date. That's the night before Hell in a Cell. Sikoa was the most popular guy on the show by a mile. And when Grimes came out to confront him and agreed to give him the next shot, the crowd booed him. As soon as his music hit and he came out, they booed Cameron Grimes. For months, these fickle fuckers in the audience chanted for this man. They wanted so badly to see him beat LA Knight and win the $1 million belt. And he did. And then he got serious and he talked about winning the North American title for his late father. And they cheered. Now, a few weeks later, they boo him. And they chant, "You got lucky" at him after he won the triple threat match last week. Look, I understand they really like Solo Sikoa. But this is wrestling fans in a nutshell right here. What has this man done to warrant being booed? Nothing. He's done nothing. Yet they boo and they heckle him. These people are every bit as obnoxious as the fans at Full Sail were right before they left there. There was a backstage segment with Nathan Frazer being interviewed when he was interrupted by Zion Quinn. Then Wes Lee interrupted to set up another match between Lee and Quinn. I don't know if this is leading anywhere, but there was a brief interaction between Frazer and Lee. I think those two would make a great tag team. They share a very similar style, and if they're looking for a new MSK, I mean, not necessarily under that name, I think Frazer would fit the bill. The Creed brothers, they were still miffed at Roderick Strong for helping them beat the Viking Raiders last week, and so they're wrestling the Vikings again this Tuesday. And this time, they want to win the match on their own. They don't want any help. They don't want any interference. Roddy then introduced them to the newest member of Diamond Mine, Damon Kemp, which is the name they gave to Gable Stevenson's older brother, Bobby. And that was about it as far as the male involvement on this show outside of the mixed tag, which had Grayson Waller teaming with Tiffany Stratton to take on Andre Chase and Saray, which Saray won for her team. There was a backstage segment with Von Wagner also, but it's Von Wagner and I just can't bring myself to care. So we had the start of the women's breakout tournament. And the bracket looks like this. On the left side, we've got Nikita Lyons. Calm down. Nikita Lyons against Santino Morella's daughter, Ariana Grace. As name changes go, that one's actually not bad. And Fallon Henley against Sloane Jacobs. On the right side of the bracket, we've got Roxanne Perez against Kiana James and Lash Legend taking on Tatum Paxley. I look at this bracket, and I have only one conclusion to draw. They're going to give us Lyons and Legend again in the finals, aren't they? Aren't they? Lyons beat Grace to advance, and Henley beat Jacobs to advance. They opened the show with Toxic Attraction beating Roxanne Perez and Wendy Chu to retain the women's tag team titles. Mandy Rose was interfering, seemingly at will, interfering in this match. I would keep Lash Legend far away from the finals, and I would send Roxanne to the finals to face Nikita Lyons. They made it clear the winner of the tournament gets a match for the championship of their choosing, implying that they could go after the tag team titles if they want. I could see Perez winning. She's the underdog who pulls it out in the end, and she wins the entire thing. And I could see her then choosing a rematch for her and Wendy Chu to go after the tag team titles, and this time they win them from Gigi and JC. I mean, why not? The winners of the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic opted for an NXT Women's Championship match instead. So it only makes sense that the winner of the breakout tournament would opt for a tag team title match. But in these two matches that we had, the first two tournament matches here, nobody stood out. It was pretty standard stuff. It was a little rough, which is to be expected. They closed the show with Natalya in what is scheduled to be her final NXT appearance, taking on Cora Jade. Fun fact, Natty has been wrestling longer than Cora has been alive. Think about that. Cora lost. The idea, though, is that she gained just by hanging in there against a veteran like Natty, and when Natty locked her in the sharpshooter at the end, she passed out rather than tapped out. Even though she could have done a better job with it, because 1 second it looks like she's having a conversation with the referee. I don't know what they're talking about. They're talking, and then the next minute she's out cold. That could have been done a little bit better, but she's young, she's 20 or 21, she's got time to figure out all of the nuances. I thought the first half of this was pretty dull. The match picked up late. Natty thought that Cora tapped, and when the referee told her no, she passed out. She didn't tap out. Natty extended her hand to help her up, and the two of them hugged to close out the show. She had earned Natty's respect. They wanted Natty to work with Cora specifically because the company thinks that Cora Jade has got the cute girl thing going on that they think will attract young men to the show and boys to the show. This is how they book. This is really how they book the entire show. This entire show has turned into one giant thirst trap. And once they trap you, they kidnap you. This is NXT.